Hi there. Today I would like to talk to you a little bit about cutting a rubber block for printing. What you're going to need for this project is some sort of a soft, flexible rubber block, a linoleum cutting tool, a pencil, and if you want to have some sort of an image printed out nearby to use as a reference while you're cutting or drawing, and then some optional cutting tools here like an X-Acto knife, a utility knife, or a pair of scissors. These are optional. I'll show you how they could be useful later on. For right now, I'm just going to set them aside. Let's start off by talking about this linoleum cutting tool. You'll notice that when you shake it, you're hearing this sound, and what that is the handle holding the blade tips. What you'll need to do is just turn the back of this handle, and you'll see that this is a storage container that holds the cutting tips inside. Now I want you to notice when you're pulling them out that these are sharp cutting tips. And let's take a look at one of them. You'll see that on one edge it's a soft rounded edge that's not sharp. It usually has maybe some type engraved into it. You might see a number engraved onto the back depending on the manufacturer. Some of them have these numbers engraved and some don't. But on this end, this is the sharp cutting tip. So when you're pulling it out, please be careful not to cut yourself on these sharpened tips. I have 4 cutting tools in mine. You may have a few more, you may have a few less. Let's just take a look at these 4 that I have available. This is a number 1 tip, and it is the smallest V gouge. You'll see that it's sort of shaped like a small letter V. And then I have also a number 2 tip, which is also a V gouge, but it's a much larger letter V. And then as we move on to number 3, this is the number 3 tip. Now this is a little bit more rounded on the bottom. It's a U gouge, but it's a medium-sized U gouge. And then the last one that I have in my tools kit is a number 5. This is the largest U gouge. You may also have a number 4, which looks a lot like the number 5, but with a flattened bottom. And then you might also have a number 6, which looks like just a sharp cutting blade. I am going to set these aside, and actually I'm going to put them back into the handle except for the number 1. I will probably start with a number 1. So I'm going to put these extra blades away for now, and I want to show you how to put a blade into the cutting tip of the handle. You'll notice that the top turns, and you don't have to turn it so that it comes completely apart, but I'm going to do it just to show you what's inside. If I keep turning it until it completely comes off the tip, inside this tip are 2 pieces. One has like a round shape, and the other is a crescent shape that just fits right into it together like this. And what we're going to do is put this back together, but what you want to do is find that space between the crescent and the round shape. This is where that soft round edge of your cutting tool fits into, and that's what's going to hold it tight and in place. So it's going in between these 2 pieces that are inside your handle. So now I'm going to put it back together. If you do take yours apart, you can just set it right back on top of the handle and take this tip and just screw it back in place. And you'll see a little more clearly now the 2 pieces that are floating inside. All right, as you tighten it, it becomes tighter and it squeezes those 2 pieces close together. So we want to loosen it a little bit to open them up so that there's space for this cutting tool to fit, again, to fit in between those 2 pieces that are inside. And then you'll tighten it by turning it clockwise, and then your cutting tool should be nice and tight and not wobbly. All right, now that we have the cutting tool ready, I'm going to set it aside and talk to you a little bit about the block. Now the rubber block you might have, it might be a little bit different than this block that I have. So mine is two-tone, has a white side and a gray side. The one you have might be completely white. It might be a little bit thicker than this one, or it might even be a pink rubber block. A lot of them are just very similar. They're just made by different companies. They have slight differences. This is just the one that I happen to have right now. The thing that I really like about this rubber block is that the gray layer is very thin. So as you're cutting, you can cut down and see the white underneath shining through. So you can kind of see your image a little bit more. I'm going to switch to a larger tip and show you how that looks with a larger tip. Let's see, maybe we'll go with a number 2 this time. Now what you want to do is always put this cap back in place, because it's important that that's in place so that you can hold it correctly. This rounded edge goes right in the palm of your hand, and then you grip it kind of like this. Sometimes I have a finger out right here to kind of help control it, but you want that to be sitting right in the palm of your hand, and you flip it over and you gouge into the block by pushing down, and you can see the white of the bottom layer kind of show through. Now with most of these blocks, you really don't have to cut very deeply. Even a thin narrow or shallow cut can be seen pretty clearly when you print. But what you're doing is trying to just use the motion of your hand to slide across the block to make these cutting lines. You can see that one a little bit more clearly. Notice that my other hand is always behind the blade. You never ever want to hold the block on this side, because of course if you slip, you're going to just gouge right into your fingers. So always keep your other hand on the back behind your cutting tip or on the side. Now you can use this to make straight line cuts or curved cuts, or you can make little stippling dots. A lot of different kinds of patterns that you can create. You can cut lines that are fairly close together, or you can keep them very far apart. And of course you can turn them to do some cross-hatching designs. So feel free to play around with it a little bit. If you want to, you can turn it over on the back and do just a little bit of practice cutting on the back. Don't do too much because you don't want to lose too much material on the back. But you can do a little bit of practice on the back before you start on the front and your main image area. So let's talk about the image you're going to cut. I am going to use this owl image. You know, it helps me to see the image while I'm drawing it onto a block. So what I did was print this owl out, and then I looked at it while I was sketching it out onto the block. So you can use your pencil and just sort of sketch it out a little bit, make a kind of a rough sketch. If you want to just do it, you know, from memory, that's fine too. And your pencil works really well just drawing on this block. It doesn't erase so well, but you can just sort of draw a basic rough idea of what you want your image to look like. Don't worry too much about those little fine details because you're going to do that with the cutting tool. I'll go ahead and set that aside. Now what I'm going to do first, because I know that I want the outline of this owl to be cleared of all material, I'm just going to go ahead and use that number 2 V-gouge and cut an outline around this owl. I've decided, I did draw this branch in, but I decided that I don't really want that branch in this image, so I'm just going to cut around it. Now, when I show you the printing demo, you'll see that the way this works is what you cut away is the stuff that doesn't print. Basically, anything that's left behind, that's raised up from the block, that's what prints. You'll see that more clearly when I get to the printing demo. So just remember, cutting away is basically creating a white line, and that's how you can see it in this block. The stuff that's remaining is what prints. want you to notice that I'm not trying to create a very realistic looking owl in this process. This is a very graphic material and a graphic method. So what you're looking for are patterns and designs that kind of replicate what you see in an image without having to go into creating all the tiniest little details, but just look for patterns like the star shapes I put around its eyes and a few of the lines that creates these ridges that goes around its chest. And remember that what you can do is go ahead and make a proof print, and then you can always come back and cut it some more as well. So what I'm going to do is stop right here and make a proof print and just see how it looks before I go in to cut it some more. But like I said before, I know that I want this area to all be cut away. And let me show you a couple different ways that you could do it. So the cutting tips do have different purposes. They do make different marks. I did most of mine with this number 2, but feel free to play around with the number 1 if you want to make smaller dots or thinner lines. And the number 3 also makes some really nice big dots or big lines. And the number 5, the biggest one, is really great for just clearing out large areas. And I'll show you how you can do that with this number 5 tool. All right, now as you can tell, I've cut away around the owl a lot of that white area that I want to see. I could just keep cutting with this number 5 tool and completely remove all of this gray area around it, but this is when you could bring in one of your other cutting tools, either with a utility knife or an X-Acto blade, and cut around it, or even just using a pair of scissors. Now what's handy is now that I've cut this part away, it's very thin and narrow here, so it's a lot easier to cut through that small material with a pair of scissors. When it's really thick like this, I wouldn't try to cut through so much thickness with a pair of scissors, but in these thin areas, it's not going to be as much of a problem. And there you have an image cut out and ready to stamp and make a print. If you want to, I like to hold on to these little pieces because there's still a little bit of room there to make tiny little patterns and decorative pieces. So these can make some really nice little handheld stamps as well. So hold on to these and make some more block prints if you want to with those. So let's go ahead and make a proof print of this owl and see how it looks. All right, to print this rubber block that you've carved, you're going to need, of course, your rubber block that you're going to be carving, some printing ink. I'm using a water-soluble block printing ink, some sort of a rubber brayer for spreading out the ink, a glass plate to use as your inking table, a few sheets of paper that you're going to be printing on. And it's a good idea to always have handy a spray bottle with just some water and a paper towel nearby for cleanup. And sometimes I like to go ahead and spritz the surface of it just so that I have it here for cleanup ready to go when I need it. So what I'm going to do first is to take the block printing ink and squeeze a line of it across the surface of my inking table. It doesn't take a lot, just a little bit is enough. And what I'll do is take my brayer, and I want you to notice that when I have the brayer at rest, I'm resting it on the back of the brayer and not on the rubber roller side of it, because what happens is if it rests on this side, on the roller side, it'll create a flat area on that rubber roller, which will make it not be able to print evenly. So when you're not using it, always leave it resting on its back. What I'm going to do is put the brayer down on the glass table and push it up just a little bit into that ink. So I pick up a small amount, and then I'm going to roll that small amount out just below it here, and I'll keep going back and just picking up small amounts at a time. And what I want to do is create a nice even area of ink just below where all of that ink has been placed. Now you'll notice as you look at it, there's some heavy areas here, heavy areas here. It's not even over here, it's not even over here. So I'm basically just gonna keep rolling through until I get all of that ink nice and even, turning it vertically and horizontally. Now what I want to create is an area of ink that looks kind of smooth and even and kind of velvety. And you can see it sparkles just a little bit. You can see the light shining off the tips of those little bits of ink. You don't want it shiny and gloppy like this, but just a smooth, even velvety look. And what you'll do is pick up ink from here and then apply it to your carved block. And the trick here is to apply multiple thin layers. Try not to add a thick, heavy layer all at once, but 2 or 3 thin layers will work much better than any thick ink. You really don't want thick, gloppy ink to get into all those nice cuts that you've made. Now for this first print, if there's no ink already on the block, you might need to add a few more extra layers. So I'm putting down maybe 3 or 4 layers of ink for this very first print. For the subsequent prints, just 1 or 2 layers will be enough. Now what you're probably going to do is put ink down on it and you're going to look at it and say, I don't know, is that enough ink? I'm not really sure. Well, the best way to know for sure is to make a print. And if you want to, maybe keep some scrap paper around to practice a proof print first before you start making your first print. So let's just take a look and see how this one prints, if there's enough ink on it. Make sure you press down all the way around, give it nice even pressure all over your full image, and then peel it up gently without shifting. And there it is. It's looking pretty good. And for the next print, I'll just add maybe just 1 or 2 more layers. And if I need more ink here, I can always roll the brayer back in there and add more ink and even it out again before I apply more ink to my block. After you're finished printing, the cleanup is actually fairly easy. Go ahead and move your prints out of the way. And since it's a water-based ink, all you really need is water and a paper towel to clean up. What I'm going to use first of all is a palette knife. If you have one of these handy, go ahead and use this to scrape off the excess ink. If you don't, you can just use a paper towel to wipe it up.